Mafia boss bought an abandoned vineyard, found a hiding woman, and said, "You're safe here." The road was 99% dust and 1% gravel. It climbed for 3.5 miles through sun-scorched hills that looked like crumpled brown paper, the vegetation baked brittle and gold. Alessandro Marone drove with the windows down, the oppressive dry heat a welcome change from the city's damp, rotting humidity. He was tired. It was a fatigue that went bone deep, a weariness of the soul that came from 2 decades of bloodshed, negotiations, and lies. He had stepped back, handed the daily operations to his cousin. He had told them he was done. The vineyard was his escape, or perhaps his penance. It was derelict, just as the agent had promised. The main house, a 2-story Spanish-style structure, sagged under a cracked tile roof. The vines themselves were a tangled, chaotic mess, choking on weeds, but the land was isolated. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. The air was quiet, filled only with the sound of insects and wind. It was, he thought, the perfect place to forget the smell of iron and concrete. He parked the black sedan, the engine ticking in the oppressive silence. He carried 1 bag inside. The air in the house was stale, tasting of dust and rodent droppings. He didn't care. He found a bottle of whiskey he'd packed and a single glass, pouring himself 3 fingers before sinking into a threadbare armchair that faced the empty valley. That first night, silence settled over the property like a shroud. There was no gunfire, no sirens, no late-night calls demanding his judgment. There was only the buzz of the generator he'd started and the chirping of crickets. He was halfway through the bottle, the whiskey doing its slow work of unwinding the knots in his shoulders, when he heard it, a sound from below, a scrape, a dry, furtive movement, like a sack of grain being dragged a few inches across a stone floor, the old cellar. He paused, the glass halfway to his lips. His body went still, every sense honed by years of walking into rooms where death might be waiting. He listened. The house was old. The realtor had mentioned animals. Raccoons, he decided, or perhaps a possum family that had taken up residence. He was a man accustomed to human threats. The animal kind held no interest for him. He dismissed the sound, finished his drink, and slept for the first time in a decade without a gun under his pillow. He spent the next few in a haze of physical labor, clearing debris from the porch, assessing the damage to the outbuildings. He worked until his muscles burned and his hands, accustomed to signing orders and, long ago, pulling triggers, were raw and blistered. It felt good. It felt real. The noise did not repeat. He forgot about it. On the 4th night, he woke at 2 a.m, a primal thirst pulling him from a shallow, restless sleep. He padded barefoot down the grand, dusty staircase, the generator humming its low monotone. He was heading to the kitchen for water when he froze. A sound, not a scrape this time. A clink, the sound of a glass jar tapping gently against a shelf. He moved without making a sound, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness of the hallway. The kitchen was lit only by the weak yellow moonlight filtering through the grime on the windows. He saw a shape in the pantry, a small, hunched figure digging frantically. He flipped the light switch. The figure shrieked, a high, thin sound that was half-strangled, and stumbled back, crashing into a shelf. Cans of expired vegetables rained down. It was a woman, or rather, the ghost of one. She was skeletal, her face gaunt and streaked with dirt. Her hair was a matted, tangled nest. She wore a man's flannel shirt that hung off her sharp shoulders like a tarp, and beneath it, filthy jeans. She was a bundle of rags and terror, and her eyes were huge in her starved face, wide and white, screaming a panic that her throat could not. In her hand, she clutched half a box of stale crackers. Alessandro didn't move. He simply stood in the doorway, his 6'3" frame blocking the only exit. He assessed her the way he assessed any new situation. Threat level, variables, motive. She was no threat. She was a terrified animal. She pressed herself against the back wall, trembling so violently the shelves rattled. She said nothing. She just watched him, her breath coming in tiny, painful gasps. She was waiting for the yell, for the blow, for the police. He saw her, truly saw her, not just the dirt, but the deep, purple-black shadow on her jaw, the way she held her left arm protectively against her ribs. He recognized the signs. He had spent his life surrounded by men who inflicted this kind of damage. He let out a slow breath, purposefully relaxing his shoulders, making himself smaller. He didn't raise his voice. He kept it low, calm, the same tone he used to gentle a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. She flinched at the sound. He took a small step back, opening the doorway. "You're safe here." The words hung in the air. She stared at him, confusion warring with the terror. Safe. It was a word that had no meaning for her. He nodded toward the crackers still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "You can have those. There is better food in the fridge." He turned his back on her, a calculated risk, a deliberate show of non-aggression, and walked to the refrigerator. He took out a bottle of water, a plastic-wrapped block of cheese, and an apple. He set them on the heavy wooden kitchen table, then moved to the stove. He turned on the gas burner, the whoosh and click echoing in the silence. He found a pot, filled it with water, and began searching the cabinets for soup. He did not look at her again until he heard a chair scrape. He glanced over. She had crept out of the pantry. She was sitting at the far end of the table, her entire body coiled, ready to bolt, but she was eating. She was tearing at the cheese with her fingers and biting into the apple with a desperation that twisted his gut. He quietly prepared the soup, heated a can of chicken noodle, and poured it into a bowl. He placed it on the table, along with a spoon, and slid it down the wooden surface toward her. She watched it slide, her eyes tracking it like a predator. She ate the soup. She ate it all. When she was done, he spoke again, still not looking directly at her. "There is a bathroom upstairs. Second door on the left. The water is hot. There are towels in the hall closet. You can take the room opposite." She said nothing. She just watched him. "You're safe here," he repeated. He left the kitchen, leaving her alone with the empty bowl. He went back to his room, but he did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the window, listening to the sounds of the old house. An hour later, he heard the faint sound of pipes groaning as the shower ran. Her name was Eva Monroe. He found her discarded. Torn driver's license in the pocket of the filthy jeans she'd left in a pile outside her bedroom door. He'd found them when he went to leave a clean t-shirt and a pair of his old sweatpants. She remained a ghost for the next few days. She would only come out of the spare room when she was sure he was outside. He would leave food on a tray by her door, and hours later, the tray would be back in the hallway, the plate empty. He saw the bruises more clearly now. She had a split lip that was healing, and the marks on her arms were definitely fingerprints. While she hid, he made one call. He used a burner phone he'd brought for just such an occasion. He called a man in the city, a man who owed him his life. "I need information," Alessandro said, staring out at the dead vines. "A woman, Eva Monroe." "Trouble?" the voice on the other end asked. "Just find her." The call came back 2 days later. The information chilled him. Eva Monroe didn't exist, not anymore. She'd been reported missing 3 weeks ago. The report was filed and then suspiciously closed. She was the girlfriend of a man named Tyler Grant. Grant was small-time, a drug runner with a nasty reputation for controlling women, but he was connected. He worked for a rival organization, a detail that made Alessandro's jaw tighten. And Tyler was looking for her, not with the police. He was looking with his own men. Alessandro hung up the phone and looked at the locked door down the hall. He didn't pressure her. He didn't knock. He simply continued his work, making his presence on the property solid, predictable. He wanted her to learn the rhythm of his day. He wanted her to understand that he left in the morning and returned in the evening, that his voice was never raised, that his hands were busy rebuilding, not breaking. The breakthrough came during the storm. It rolled in from the mountains just after dusk, a sudden, violent tempest that threw rain against the windows like handfuls of gravel. The wind howled, rattling the old house to its foundations. Alessandro was reading in the living room by the light of a single lamp when the generator sputtered, coughed, and died. The house was plunged into absolute, deafening darkness. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then he heard it. A small, gasping cry from upstairs. He grabbed a flashlight from the mantel and took the stairs 2 at a time. Her door was open. The room was empty. "Eva!" he called. A sound, like a whimpering animal, came from the hallway linen closet. He pulled the door open. She was crammed inside, huddled between stacks of mildewed sheets, her hands clamped over her ears, her knees drawn to her chest. She was rocking back and forth, hyperventilating. "No, no, no, please. Tyler, I'm sorry. Please don't," she whispered. Her voice raw. This was not fear of the dark. This was terror. This was a memory. "Ava." He kept his voice low and steady, not reaching for her, just putting his presence in the small space. She didn't hear him. She was gone, lost in a past he could only guess at. "Eva, it's Alessandro. You're at the Vineyard. You are not there." He crouched down, keeping the beam of the flashlight pointed at the floor so it wouldn't blind her. "Breathe. You need to breathe." He reached out slowly, his large, calloused hand moving into her line of sight. He didn't touch her face. He didn't grab her. He placed his hand firmly on her shoulder, a solid, grounding weight. She flinched, a violent shudder, but she didn't pull away. "You are safe," he said, his voice an anchor in the storm of her panic. "I am right here." "He's not." "Breathe with me." He held her gently, his hand on her shoulder, his presence a solid wall between her and the ghosts in the darkness. He didn't try to pull her out. He just stayed with her, talking in a low monotone, grounding her with calm words and quiet strength. He told her about the rain, about the old house, about the generator. He just talked. Slowly. Her breathing evened out. The rocking subsided. Her hands dropped from her ears. She was still trembling, but she was present. The storm raged outside, inside the closet. The air was hot and still. She was leaning against him now, her forehead resting against his arm. Though she probably didn't realize it, she was exhausted, her body damp with sweat and tears. He shifted, and his thumb brushed against her cheek. She was so thin. He could feel the sharp line of her jaw. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Nothing to be sorry for," he said gruffly. He reached up, his fingers moving of their own accord. He gently brushed the damp, matted hair from her face. His touch was surprisingly tender. His fingers lingered for a second, a rough texture against her soft, cold skin. Her breath hitched, her eyes wide and luminous in the dim light, locked on his. It was a moment suspended in time. The static charge in the air wasn't just from the storm. It was a flicker of something else, something human and fragile. He saw her. She saw him. Then she broke it. She pulled back, scrambling away from his touch as if she'd been burned. She pushed herself out of the closet and stood in the dark hallway, wrapping her arms around her own waist, not ready. Alessandro stood up, his knees cracking. He didn't crowd her. He just kept the flashlight beam on the floor. "The generator needs to be reset," he said, his voice all business. "Stay here. I'll get the lights." He left her in the hallway. When he returned 10 minutes later, the lights were buzzing back to life. She was gone. Her door was closed. But this time, it was not locked. The dynamic shifted. The next morning, she came downstairs. Alessandro was already outside, examining a row of gnarled, dead vines. He was measuring, making notes in a small book. He heard the crunch of gravel and looked up. Ava stood on the porch, wearing the clean clothes he'd left her. She was holding 2 mugs of coffee. She looked pale, exhausted, but she was upright. She was in the daylight. She didn't speak. She just walked over and held out one of the mugs. He took it. Their fingers brushed. She didn't flinch. "Thank you," he said. She just nodded, wrapping her hands around her own mug as if for warmth, though the morning was already heating up. She looked at the mess of vines he was studying. "They're dead," she said. Her voice was rusty. "Most of them." He agreed. "But these," he pointed with his pencil, "these just need to be pruned, cut back hard so they can grow again." She watched him for a long moment. He went back to his work, sipping the coffee. She didn't leave. My grandfather had a garden," she said, her voice so quiet he almost missed it. "He taught me how to prune roses." Alessandro looked up, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. He held out the shears he'd tucked into his belt. "Be my guest," he said. She hesitated. Then slowly, she took the shears from his hand. She stepped up to the vine, her hands shaking slightly. He watched her. She studied the plant, her brow furrowed, and then she made the first cut, a clean, decisive snap that cut away the dead wood. He picked up a second pair of shears and started on the next vine. They worked side by side for hours. The only sound, the snip-snip of the shears and the buzzing of insects. They didn't talk about the storm. They didn't talk about Tyler. They didn't talk about the Mafia. They talked about the vines. Late in the afternoon, he made a joke about a particularly stubborn root. She looked at him, and a small, cracked smile touched her lips. It was the first one he had seen. A tiny, fragile sound escaped her. A laugh. Alessandro's hands stilled. He watched her, and the protective, cold armor around his own heart softened. Just a fraction. The work was hard, but in the shared silence and the common goal of cutting away the dead, something new was beginning to take root. The fear did not vanish. It had been her companion for too long. A parasite burrowed deep under her skin. But with each passing day, it receded, like a tide pulling away from the shore, leaving small, damp patches of memory that she could finally walk around instead of drown in. Eva began to talk. She never spoke of Tyler. She never mentioned the city, or the fear, or the things she had seen. Instead, she spoke of the small things, the parts of her that existed before him. She told Alessandro, while they were yanking stubborn weeds from the earth, that her grandmother used to grow tomatoes that tasted like candy. She confessed, while they washed the dinner dishes, that she was terrified of spiders. She admitted that she had never seen the ocean, even though she had lived less than 100 miles from it her entire life. Alessandro never pushed. He never asked about the bruises that had faded to yellow. He never asked how she ended up in his cellar. When she offered these small, fragile pieces of herself, he accepted them quietly. He was a collector of secrets, and he knew how to guard them. In return, he offered his own, not the dark, bloody ones, but the human ones. He told her, while sanding a piece of wood for a new window frame, that his mother had taught him to cook, and that he missed her food every day. He admitted he hated the sound of people chewing. A rhythm established itself, as steady as a heartbeat. Mornings began before the sun. When the air was still cool and smelled of dust and wild rosemary, they would work in the vineyard, clearing the deadwood, their silence comfortable. He taught her to use the tools, his large hands covering hers to show her the proper grip, the right angle. He would watch her, noting the new strength in her arms, the color returning to her face. They ate lunch on the shaded porch, simple meals of bread, cheese, and fruit. In the afternoons, the heat was too oppressive for the fields, so they worked on the house, repairing the sagging porch, cleaning decades of grime from the windows. They moved in an easy tandem, wordlessly passing tools, anticipating each other's needs. In the evenings, they would sit on the terrace as the sky bled purple and orange, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the soft clink of their glasses. The unspoken longing was a third presence, a heavy, warm thing that settled between them. He would watch the curve of her throat as she drank her water. She would watch his hands as he held his wine glass, mesmerized by the contrast of their raw power and their present gentleness. The fragile peace was broken by accident. They were hauling rotting oak barrels from the flooded cellar, a task that was too much for one person, barely possible for two. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and spoiled wine. Eva, insistent on proving her strength, had taken the heavier end of a barrel stave. She was walking backward up the slick stone steps when her foot slipped. She went down hard, the heavy wood clattering against the wall, her body twisting. She cried out, a sharp sound of pain and surprise. Alessandro was on her in an instant. He had cleared the 4 steps between them before she had even registered the fall. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice a low growl. He was kneeling beside her, his presence eclipsing the dim light. He didn't ask if she was okay. He was already assessing, his hands hovering over her. "Where?" he asked. "My ankle," she whispered, her face pale. He lifted her easily, his arms sliding under her back and knees as if she weighed nothing. She gasped, her hands instinctively flying to his shoulders, gripping the solid muscle there. He carried her up the remaining steps and into the kitchen, setting her gently on the heavy wooden table. Their bodies had been pressed close for only a second, but the imprint was seared into both of them. She could still feel the hard wall of his chest, the scent of him, sweat, dry earth, and a faint, clean note of soap. He knelt in front of her. "Let me see." His hands were rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly careful as he examined her leg. He prodded the bone, testing for breaks. His fingers were warm against her skin, sending a jolt through her that had nothing to do with pain. "I think it's just a sprain," he said, his voice rough. His eyes met hers. "But you were careless." "I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky. She was trying to pull her leg back, but he held her steady. "Be still," he ordered. His hands lingered, moving from her ankle to her calf, checking for any other injuries. His thumbs brushed the sensitive skin behind her knee. She watched him, her breath caught in her throat. He was so close. The air crackled, thick with the things they had never said. He was looking at her leg, but his jaw was tight, his focus absolute. He was a man holding on to control by a thread. He looked up, and his dark eyes held hers captive. They stayed like that for a long moment. Then, as if waking from a trance, he stood abruptly. "Ice," he said, turning to the freezer. "You will stay off it for the rest of the day." That night, she found him on the terrace. The ankle was throbbing, but she refused to let it keep her in her room. He was leaning against the railing, a bottle of red wine open beside him, staring out into the blackness of the valley. She limped over, not speaking, and sat in the chair near his. He heard her, of course. He turned and, without a word, poured a measure of wine into a second glass and slid it toward her. She took it. "Thank you. For earlier." He gave a non-committal grunt, swirling the dark liquid in his own glass. "You're good at that," she said quietly. "Fixing things." He let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "I'm better at breaking them." The confession hung in the air. Eva watched his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the deep shadows under his eyes. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alessandro was silent for a long time, the only sound the distant shriek of an owl. "In my old life," he said finally, his voice low, "I was a man who solved problems. And the solutions, they were permanent. They left stains." He turned to look at her, his eyes unreadable in the dark. "I've done dark things, Eva, things that a man can't wash off, no matter how hard he scrubs." She didn't flinch. She just held his gaze. "I came here," he continued, "because I was tired of the noise, tired of the blood. I bought this broken place because I thought I deserved it. I thought I could just... Stop. Stop being that man." He looked down at his hands, clenching them on the railing. "I am trying to be a better man, but I'm not sure that man even exists." "He does," she whispered, her voice fierce. "I've seen him." His gaze snapped back to hers. He looked at her as if he were starving and she was the first food he'd seen in years. Before he could speak, a low rumble echoed through the valley. A flash of light illuminated the hills in the distance. A storm. Eva flinched, the glass trembling in her hand. "It's just thunder," he said, but his voice was already tight with concern. The wind picked up, sending a chill across the terrace. Another rumble, closer this time. Then the sky opened. Rain began to fall, not in drops, but in solid, heavy sheets. Eva was on her feet, her bad ankle forgotten. Her breathing was coming fast. "Eva, it's all right." He reached for her, but she was already gone, lost in the memory. She scrambled back inside, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't go to the closet this time. She ran to the laundry room, the smallest. most windowless room in the house, and huddled behind the door, trembling. Alessandro found her there a moment later. The room was dark, the only light the flashlight from his phone. She was curled into a tight ball, her hands over her ears. "No, please," she was whispering, rocking back and forth. "Please, I'll be good." His heart cracked. He didn't speak. He simply crouched down, sat on the cold tile floor, and leaned his back against the washing machine. He didn't touch her. He just sat, his presence a solid, unmovable object in the small, dark space. He waited. It took 10 minutes. When the trembling subsided, he held out his hand. She looked at it, then at his face. He said nothing. He just waited. Slowly, she uncurled. She crawled the few feet separating them and collapsed against him, burying her face in his chest. This time, he did not just ground her. He held her. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into his lap, his hand stroking her hair, his body shielding her from the sound of the storm. "I have you," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe. I have you." She cried. It was not the silent, fearful weeping he had seen before. This was a storm of her own, a gut-wrenching, heartbroken flood of grief and terror that she had held back for months. She cried for her old life, for her stolen safety, for the bruises and the fear. She cried until she was empty, and he just held her, his shirt soaked with her tears, his jaw set, a cold, murderous rage building in his chest for the man who had done this to her. He held her until her breathing finally evened out, and she was limp with exhaustion, asleep in his arms. The storm passed, their own private storm had broken, too. In the days that followed, the air between them was different. It was charged, intimate. Touches that had been accidental were now deliberate. His hand would rest on the small of her back as they passed in the narrow hallway. She would bring him a glass of water in the field, her fingers brushing his as he took it, their glances held for seconds longer than necessary. The unspoken longing was now a low, burning fire. The plumbing in the old house was unreliable. One brutally hot afternoon, after hours spent digging an irrigation trench, they were both covered in mud and sweat. The shower in the main bathroom produced nothing but a rusty gurgle. "I'll use the hose," Ava said, grabbing a towel and a bottle of shampoo. Alessandro followed her out to the garden. He watched as she turned on the spigot, the water spraying wildly. She was trying to wash her hair, but she was struggling, the water pressure awkward, her arms getting tangled. "Here," he said, his voice gruff. He took the hose from her. "Turn around." She obeyed. Her back to him. "Tilt your head," he commanded. He adjusted the nozzle, the water running cold and clean. He soaked her hair, the water running in rivulets down her neck, soaking the thin cotton shirt she wore. He put the hose down and took the shampoo bottle. He poured a large amount into his own hand. "Close your eyes." She did. And then his hands were in her hair. His large, calloused hands he had just admitted were stained, began to work. He scrubbed her scalp, his fingers strong and thorough, massaging the tension from her skull. It was not a gentle touch, but it was not rough. It was possessive. It was intimate. Eva moaned, a low sound in her throat, and leaned her head back against his hands. A complete, bone-deep surrender. Alessandro's breathing hitched. He could smell her skin, the green scent of the shampoo, the heat rising from her body. He could see the pulse beating in her throat, the water sluiced down her back. Her shirt clinging to her, outlining the sharp, delicate line of her spine. The curve of her ribs. He wanted to put his mouth on her neck. He wanted to trace the water with his tongue. He wanted to turn her around and kiss her until they were both breathless. Instead, he picked up the hose. "Rinse." His voice was a low growl. He rinsed her hair, his movements clipped, his control stretched to the breaking point. When he was done, he turned the water off. The sudden silence was deafening. She stood there, water dripping from her, trembling. But it was not from cold, and it was not from fear. He handed her the towel. Done. He walked away before she could see the raw, burning desire on his face. That night, sleep was impossible for both of them. Alessandro lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of her wet, pliant body burned into his mind. He dreamed of her, a restless, feverish dream where she was in his bed, her hair spread across his pillow, her mouth open under his. He woke up hard and aching, his name a curse on his lips. Eva lay in her own bed, her body humming. She was haunted by the memory of his hands. She was terrified, but it was a different kind of terror. It was not the fear of being hurt. It was the fear of wanting. She craved connection. She craved his touch. She was tired of being afraid. At 2 a.m, they both rose. He, to pace the dark hallway and walk off the dream. She, to get a glass of water and escape the ghosts. They met in the dark. They froze. 2 shadows in the moonlight filtering through the hall window. He was in sweatpants, his chest bare. She was in one of his old T-shirts, which fell to her thighs. The air was so thick it was hard to breathe. She should have run back to her room. He should have walked away. Neither moved. Then, she did the one thing he didn't expect. She reached for him. Her hand, small and trembling, landed on his bare chest. She wasn't steadying herself. She was claiming him. That was all it took. He didn't crash into her. He didn't grab. He cupped her face, his thumbs stroking the high, sharp line of her cheekbones. He looked into her eyes, a silent question. Her answer was to lean in. He met her halfway. The kiss was not soft. It was deep, aching and filled with a desperate, starved longing. It was the taste of wine and salt and unspoken confessions. He kissed her with a hunger that bordered on pain, and she kissed him back with equal, desperate force. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, his arms wrapped around her, lifting her up, pressing her body against his. It was too much. It was too fast. He was the one who broke it. He tore his mouth from hers, resting his forehead against hers, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He was trembling. He was afraid, not of her, but of himself, afraid of being the monster, of taking what he wanted instead of what she was ready to give. She misunderstood his retreat. Her hands clutched his shirt. "I want to feel safe," she whispered, her voice breaking. And wanted. He pulled back just enough to see her face in the moonlight. His eyes were dark, burning with an intensity that stole her breath. "You already are," he growled. He kissed her again. Slow this time, a promise. He didn't carry her to his room. He carried her back to hers. He laid her on the bed. But he didn't leave. He couldn't. He lay down on the covers beside her, pulling her against his side. He wrapped one arm around her waist, holding her close. She curled into his chest, her head fitting perfectly under his chin. They lay there, wrapped in each other's arms, both still fully clothed. The air was no longer charged with fire, but with a deep, profound peace. They were 2 broken halves, and for the first time, in the darkness of the old Vineyard house, they felt almost whole. They were emotionally naked, and in that vulnerability, they finally slept. The morning light was gray and tentative, filtering into the kitchen where Eva sat, nursing a mug of coffee. She had woken up in her own bed, the scent of him on the pillow, the memory of his arms a tangible warmth. She had slept through the night, a deep, dreamless sleep, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. When Alessandro entered the kitchen, the silence was heavy, charged with unspoken questions. He had also slept in his clothes. His hair was disheveled and his eyes were weary. He stopped when he saw her. She looked small in his T-shirt, her feet bare on the cold floor. She offered him a small, shy smile. "Coffee's hot." He nodded. A tight, controlled movement. He poured himself a mug, his back to her. He was afraid of rushing her, afraid that the fragile truce they had found in the dark would shatter in the daylight. He had held her. Yes, but he had been a shield against a memory. Now, he was just a man, one with a history as dark as the shadows she was fleeing. He turned, leaning against the counter, and sipped the coffee. They looked at each other over the rims of their mugs. "I have to go to town," he said, his voice rough. "We need supplies. The pantry is running low." "I'll come with you," she said too quickly. "No." The word was absolute, cold. She flinched, pulling back. "I'm not a prisoner, Alessandro." "You are not," he agreed, his voice softening. "But you are not safe. I will be back in 2 hours." He left before she could argue. The drive to the small, dusty town was tense. He kept checking his rearview mirror, a habit he thought he had left behind. The general store was a relic from another era, with a single gas pump and a bell that jingled when he walked in. The clerk, a thin man named Chet with a perpetually suspicious expression, watched him grab a basket. "You're the fella who bought the old Mancini place," Chet stated, not asked. Alessandro nodded, grabbing flour and cans of beans. "Heard you got some help up there," Chet said, wiping a glass with a dirty rag. "My nephew runs the gas station. Said he saw a woman out by your gate a week or so back. Said she looked like a ghost. Dark hair. Real jumpy." Alessandro's blood ran cold. He kept his expression neutral. "Just a relative. Visiting." "Uh-huh," Chet drawled, unconvinced. "Folks round here, they talk. Word is, you're fixing the place up. Word is, you like your privacy. Word also is, a woman like that, round here, she's either running from something or to something." Alessandro placed the items on the counter. He paid in cash, his eyes hard. "Keep the change." He drove back to the Vineyard, the road blurring. A sighting, a rumor. It was starting. He parked the car and, before going inside, walked to the far end of the property, where the cell signal was strongest. He pulled the burner phone from his pocket. He dialed a number from memory. It rang once. What? The voice was Sal's, his former right hand, the man he'd left in charge of the city. "That favor, check again, Tyler Grant, is he still looking?" A heavy sigh. "Al, I told you. He's small time but loud. Of course he's—" "Check, now." Alessandro's voice was ice. He hung up and stared at the brown hills. He waited. He hated this. He hated pulling Sal back in, hated touching that world again. The phone buzzed 15 minutes later. "You were right to call," Sal said, his voice stripped of its earlier annoyance. "It was all business. It's not just local anymore. Grant's connections, the ones you warned me about, they're active. He put a bounty out, Al, a big one, 10,000. He's not just looking for a girlfriend. He's looking for a witness." Alessandro's stomach clenched. Sal continued. "And it gets worse. He got a tip. Someone matching her description was spotted in your county. He's sending men. He's getting close." Alessandro's hand tightened on the phone, the plastic groaning. "Thank you. Do not call this number again." He ended the call. He was a fool. He had brought this woman into his house, offered her safety, and he had been living in a fantasy, pruning vines while a wildfire was racing toward them. He walked back to the house, his steps heavy. He went not to the kitchen, but to his study. He unlocked a heavy wooden desk, pulling out old ledgers, a thick address book bound in leather, and maps. These were the things that tied Alessandro Marone, the boss, to this new, quiet life. They were a trail of breadcrumbs. Eva found him in the dusk, feeding the last of the dry vineyard waste into the outdoor burning pit. Smoke curled into the purple sky, carrying the acrid smell of burning paper. She saw the flames, the stillness in his posture. She saw the open, half-empty box at his feet. She saw the cover of the leather-bound book just as he tossed it into the fire. And she broke. "What are you doing?" Her voice was sharp, laced with a panic he had not heard since the thunderstorm. He didn't turn. "Cleaning house." "You're burning things," she accused, stepping closer, her whole body vibrating with a new, terrifying energy. "You're burning evidence, hiding things, just like him." That made him turn. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were wounded. This is not the same, isn't it?" she cried, tears welling, her fists clenched. "Secrets, fires, whispers on the phone. You said I was safe here, but you're just like him. You're a liar. What's in those books? Other women, deals? Who are you, Alessandro? Who are you? Really?" She was lashing out, using the only weapon she had, her fear. She was desperate for him to deny it, to prove her wrong. But he just stood there, letting her words hit him. When you get tired of me, she choked out, when I'm not useful anymore, do you just burn the proof I was ever here? He let the silence stretch, the only sound the crackle of the fire and her ragged, sobbing breaths. He let her vent. He let her empty herself of the poison, because he knew it was not his. It was Tyler's. When she was finally quiet, hiccuping, her face streaked with tears and dirt, he spoke. His voice was quiet, rough with a pain that matched her own. I am hurt, he said, that you would think that, but I am not angry. You have every right to see monsters in the smoke. He reached into the box and pulled out the last ledger. He held it out to her. This, he said, is a list of every safe house my family owns, every property, every shell company, including this one. This is the paper trail that connects me to the men who hunt you. If they find me, they find you. He tossed the book onto the flames. It landed with a soft whoomp. I was not hiding things from you. Eva, I was destroying the last thing that tied me to the people hunting you. I am erasing me, so that all that's left is this vineyard. All that's left, he said, his eyes locking on hers, is us. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't building a wall. He was tearing his own down, brick by brick. He was making himself vulnerable, untethered for her. Oh, God, she whispered, and she broke down. A deep, wailing sob that came from the very bottom of her soul. She stumbled forward, and he caught her, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her tight against his chest. She buried her face in his shirt, sobbing his name, begging forgiveness. Shh, he murmured, his hand in her hair, holding her head against his heart. It's all right. I have you. You are safe. She looked up at him, her face a mess of tears. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with a desperate, burning need. He was her anchor. He was her shield, and she was his. She grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled his face down to hers. The kiss was not the tender exploration of the night before. It was desperate. It was hot, filled with the smoke from the fire and the salt of her tears. It was a kiss of need, of fear, of two people clinging to each other on the edge of a cliff. He groaned, his control snapping, and his mouth devoured hers, his arms locking around her like steel bands. He carried her inside. The tension did not break. It followed them, a heavy, electric blanket. Dinner was forgotten. The house was silent. They ended up in the living room, the embers from the fireplace casting a dim, red glow. He attended to her, given her a glass of water, his hands shaking slightly. They sat for hours, not speaking, just watching the dying fire. The desperation had faded, replaced by a deep, profound understanding. Finally, Eva stood. She walked to him. He was standing by the window, staring out at the dark, armed property. She came up behind him, placing her hand on his back, feeling the hard, coiled muscle. He did not move, but his breath hitched. I am so tired, she whispered, of being afraid. He turned slowly. His face was carved from shadows. Eva, I am not a good man. You are to me, she said, her voice steady. She reached up, her fingers tracing the scar on his jaw. I want to feel something else, just for tonight. I want to feel something other than fear. What do you want? He asked, his voice a low growl. She didn't flinch. I want you. That was her choice, her surrender, her reclamation. He led her to his room. There was no rush. This was not the frantic kiss by the fire. This was a slow, deliberate unwinding. The clothes fell away one by one. His shirt, her t-shirt. They stood in the moonlight, reading each other's histories in the scars. He touched the faded yellow bruise on her ribs, a shadow of the violence she had endured. He did not kiss it. He rested his forehead against her skin, his breath hot, a silent vow of vengeance and protection. She traced the long, thin scar that ran across his back, a relic from a knife fight years ago. She didn't recoil. She kissed it, her lips a soft promise of healing. He laid her on the bed. He moved over her, his body a solid, warm weight. Look at me, he commanded softly. She opened her eyes. She met his gaze, and she did not see a monster. She saw a man. He made love to her slowly, with an emotional intensity that shattered them both. Every touch was a question, every kiss an answer. Breathless murmurs replaced words. His name on her lips was a prayer. Her name on his was a claim. It was the marking of every wound, every scar, and the slow, deliberate surrender of two broken souls. It was not the cure for their trauma, but for a few hours. In the stillness of the night, it was a sanctuary. Afterward, in the quiet darkness, she curled into his chest, her ear against his heart, listening to the strong, steady beat. The peace was profound, but the world was still waiting at the gate. "Don't let them take me," she whispered, her voice small. He kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her, pulling her so close she could barely breathe. His voice, when he spoke, was not the voice of the gentle winemaker. It was the cold, flat, absolute voice of the Mafia boss. "Over my dead body!" The next day, Alessandro was a man transformed. The quiet, reflective man was gone. In his place was a general preparing for war. He was on the phone, his voice clipped, ordering irrigation supplies and electronic deer fencing. He spent the day working, his movements precise, methodical. He was burying low-voltage wire along the perimeter. He was mounting small, hidden cameras in the eaves of the house and in the thick trunks of the old oak trees, all leading back to a monitor in his study. He was arming the property. Eva watched him, a cold knot of fear in her stomach, but she did not hide. She brought him water. She held the ladder. She was no longer a ghost. She was his partner. While he worked outside, she felt the need to make the house hers, to claim the space. She went back to the cellar, the place of her first terror. It no longer held any power over her. She was cleaning, sweeping away the cobwebs when her broom knocked a loose stone in the foundation. Behind it was a small tin box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was an old journal. The ink was faded, the handwriting a feminine, elegant script. It was dated 1973. It was not a diary, but a collection of thoughts. Eva sat on the cold stone floor and read. She read about a woman, the wife of the original owner, a man with a heavy hand and a cruel temper. She read about loneliness, about fear, about feeling trapped. Then she read the last entry. "He told me I was nothing without him. He said I was a bird with a broken wing, and he was the only one who would keep me in a cage. Today, I bought a bus ticket. He was wrong. The wing is not broken. It was only resting. I am not his. I am my own." Eva closed the journal, holding it to her chest. A fierce, bright courage bloomed in her. She was not the first woman to be trapped, and she was not the first to fight back. She was not just a survivor. She was a warrior. When Alessandro came in, covered in dirt and sweat, she was waiting. She didn't show him the journal. It was hers. She simply handed him a glass of water, and he looked at her, really looked at her. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a hard, steady resolve. She was ready. The first time Alessandro placed the handgun in her palm, her entire body recoiled. It was heavy, cold, and smelled of oil and death. It was the sound of Tyler's rage, the metal of his control. "I can't," she whispered, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped it. "Yes, you can." His voice was not gentle. It was firm, absolute. He stood behind her, not touching her, but his presence was a wall. "This is not his world anymore. Eva, this is ours, and in our world, we are not defenseless." He took her hands, his own large, warm and calloused, and wrapped them around the grip. He showed her how to stand, how to breathe, how to align the sights on a row of old wine bottles he had set on a fence post 50 yards away. "Breathe out," he commanded. "Squeeze, don't pull." Her first shot kicked up dirt 10 feet to the left. The sound of it, a deafening crack that echoed across the valley, made her shriek. She dropped the gun. Alessandro did not yell. He simply bent, picked it up, and placed it back in her hand. "Again!" she cried in frustration. "I can't." "He taught you that you can't," Alessandro said, his voice low, intense. "He taught you to be small, to be afraid. He was wrong. You are not a victim. You are a survivor. Now, be a fighter." His words hit her harder than a slap. She looked at the gun. She looked at the distant bottles. She thought of the journal. She thought of the woman who bought the bus ticket. She raised the weapon. Her hands were still trembling, but she gripped it so tightly her knuckles were white. She breathed out. She squeezed. The bottle exploded. A small, shocked laugh escaped her. She looked at Alessandro, her eyes wide. A flicker of something dark and proud was in his. "Again," he said. By the end of the week, her hands were steady. She could field strip the weapon and reassemble it. She was no longer afraid of the sound. She had learned, as he had, that it was just a tool. The intent behind it was what mattered. Their shared purpose extended beyond mere survival. One afternoon, while they were repairing a collapsed trellis, she paused, looking at the main winery building, its windows boarded up. "It's sad," she said. "All this. Just left to rot." "It's just a building," he said, testing the strength of a new post. "No, it's not," she insisted, turning to him, her face alive with an idea. "It could be a place, a real place, like the journal." He stopped his work. "What are you talking about?" "When we fix this," she said, gesturing to the vines. "When we make wine. What if we didn't just sell it?" "What else do you do with wine?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. "We use it," she said, stepping closer, her eyes shining. "We use it to fund this place. We turn the house, the outbuildings. We turn it into a sanctuary, a place for other women, women like me, a place they can work, where they can heal, a place where they can learn to shoot," she added, her voice fierce. Alessandro stared at her. He saw her, not as the broken, starving creature from the cellar, but as this, a woman forged in fire, her compassion as strong as her will. He had come here to hide from the world. She was planning to save a piece of it. "Marone Vines," he said, testing the name on his tongue. "A safe, profitable place for others to work." "Exactly," she smiled. He reached out, his thumb brushing a streak of dirt from her cheek. "You," he said, his voice thick, "are going to be a very expensive partner." Their bond, forged in fear and tempered in purpose, deepened into something he had never known. The nights of sleeping clothed on top of the covers were long gone. Mornings began with the slow tangle of limbs in the soft light. He would wake to find her watching him, her fingers tracing the scar on his back, her fear of him completely erased. He would pull her close, and their passion was a silent, urgent language. It was slow and deep, a reclaiming of their own bodies. It was the heat of skin on skin, the taste of her mouth, the sound of his name whispered in the quiet of the dawn. There was no terror in her touch, only wanting. There was no violence in his, only a reverent, desperate possession. The days were filled with work and, to his constant surprise, laughter. The playful teasing that had begun over the pruning shears had become their new normal. She had taken over the garden, and when he'd come in from the fields, she would be waiting, a garden hose in her hand. "You missed a spot," she'd say, her eyes dancing, before spraying him with a stream of cold water. He would chase her, his laughter a low rumble that echoed her own, and he would catch her, lifting her off her feet, both of them dripping and breathless. It was a lightness he had never been allowed in his old life. It was a peace he had never thought he deserved. The evenings were the quietest, the deepest. After dinner, they would curl up on the old sofa, a fire crackling in the hearth. He had found a box of old books in the study, and he would read aloud to her, poetry, history, old novels. His voice, which he had used to command and threaten, was now a low, soothing cadence in the dark. She would rest her head on his chest, her eyes closing, listening to the steady beat of his heart under her ear, feeling his words vibrate through her. In those moments, they were not a boss and a fugitive. They were just a man and a woman, safe, in a house that was becoming a home. The peace was a bubble, and it was about to burst. The call came on a Tuesday. On the burner phone he had foolishly hoped he would never use again. It was Sal. The voice was tight, urgent. "Al, they're moving. That tip panned out. Grant's men, 2 of them, were spotted in the town next to yours, asking questions, waving money around, looking for a man and a dark-haired woman." Alessandro's blood turned to ice. The lightness of the past weeks evaporated, replaced by the familiar, cold weight of command. How long? A day. 2 at most. They're close. Al, get her out. I will handle it, Alessandro said, and hung up. He found her in the garden, humming, her hands covered in dirt. The sight of her, so at peace, so unaware, was a knife in his gut. He told her. He did not soften the words. They're 1 town over. They know you're here. We don't have time. She looked up, her face pale, the humming dying, but she did not cry. She did not panic. She just nodded, her jaw setting. You need to leave, he said, his voice rough. I have a contact, a car. I can get you out of the state. New name. New. No. The word was quiet, but absolute. Eva, this is not a discussion. These are not men you can fight with garden shears. They are animals. I know what they are, she said, standing up, her eyes level with his. I lived with one, but I am not running again. This is not running. This is tactical. This is staying alive, he yelled, his controls snapping. No, she yelled back, and he saw the woman from the journal, the woman who had blown the bottle to pieces. I will not spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I will not let him take this from me. He already took everything else. This place, this life, it's mine. I am not leaving you. He looked at her, his anger draining, replaced by a fierce, painful love. She was not the woman he was trying to save. She was the woman standing beside him. She was right. All right, he said, his voice hoarse. Not running, fighting. The next morning, they found it. It was scrawled on the front gate in bright red spray paint, the letters dripping like blood. We know you're in there, whore. He can't hide you. Eva saw it first. She made a small, strangled sound. Alessandro's face, which had been tense, went utterly blank. The color drained from it, and his eyes, usually so warm for her, became 2 chips of cold, black ice. The winemaker was gone. The boss was here. His past had not just caught up, it had kicked in the door. Go inside, he said, his voice flat. Alessandro. Go. Inside. Now. He worked for the rest of the day, his movements economical, precise. He did not speak. He was reinforcing the cellar, checking the monitors, placing weapons in strategic, hidden locations throughout the house. Late in the afternoon, he took her down to the wine cellar. He pushed on a section of the wall that looked like solid stone. It clicked, and a heavy door swung open, revealing a small room she had never seen. It was not a cage. It was a bunker. There were shelves with water, food, and a comprehensive medical kit, and on a small desk, a monitor that showed feeds from the 8 cameras he had installed. You will stay here, he said. It was not a request. I will fight with you, she said, her voice trembling. No, you will not. He gripped her shoulders, his face hard. Your fight was deciding to stay. My fight is keeping you alive. These men, they are not after me. They are after you, but they will have to come through me. I am a better killer than they are. I am smarter, and I am on my own ground, but I can only do it if I know you are safe, if I know you are here. He pointed to the monitor. You will watch. You will be my eyes, but you will not, under any circumstance. Leave this room. Do you promise me? She looked at him. At the cold, lethal stranger he had become, she nodded, tears in her eyes. I promise. I love you, he whispered, his voice cracking. The man returning for just a second, he kissed her, hard, a kiss of desperation and goodbye. Then he closed the heavy door, and she heard the sound of a bolt sliding into place. Night fell. Eva sat in the dark. Cold room, her eyes glued to the monitor. She saw him on the porch, a shadow in the moonlight, waiting. At 10:17, they came. A dark van, no headlights, rolling up the gravel road. 6 men, masked, armed with bats and guns. They fanned out, moving toward the house, arrogant. The back. Eva whispered into the small walkie-talkie he had left her. 2 by the kitchen door. On the monitor, she saw Alessandro nod, a shadow detaching himself from the porch. He moved. He was not a man. He was a ghost. The 2 men at the kitchen door never saw him. He came from the side, a solid, brutal force. He used a heavy piece of rebar. She heard no gunshot, just 2 short, wet thuds. The men crumpled. He disabled them, his movements fast, efficient, and terrifyingly practiced. 3 at the front, she whispered, her voice shaking. I see them. His voice crackled back. He had lured them onto the porch. She watched as he triggered the trap, a heavy mesh net loaded with old engine parts, falling from the eaves. It took all 3 down in a tangled, screaming heap. Only one was left. The driver. He saw his men go down, and he panicked. He raised his handgun and fired wildly into the darkness, toward where he'd last seen Alessandro. Al, Ava screamed, her hand flying to her mouth, on the monitor. She saw him stumble. He'd been moving toward the last man, and the bullet had caught him. He fell behind an old stone planter, out of her sight. The last man advanced, gun raised. Eva's heart stopped. He was wounded. He was down. And she had promised. She looked at the steel door. She looked at the monitor, at the armed man walking toward the planter. Her promise be damned. She didn't grab the gun Alessandro had left her. She grabbed the heavy steel flashlight from the shelf. She unbolted the door and flew up the stairs, ignoring his order, ignoring her fear, driven by a love that was more powerful than either. She burst through the cellar door into the yard. Hey, she screamed. The man whirled, surprised. He pointed the gun at her. It was the opening Alessandro needed. He lunged from behind the planter, his arm slick with blood, and drove his shoulder into the man's gut. They went down. A shot went wild, shattering a window. Alessandro was on top, his fist connecting with the man's jaw once, twice. The man went limp. Silence. Eva was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Alessandro pushed himself to his feet, clutching his left shoulder. Blood was pouring between his fingers, a dark, pulsing stream. She ran to him. You're hurt, she stammered. You weren't supposed to, he growled. But the words had no heat. He was pale. Shut up, she said, her voice shaking but steady. She ripped open his shirt. The bullet had gone clean through the fleshy part of his shoulder. A graze, but a deep one. It was bleeding, a lot. She pushed him down onto the porch steps, her hands all business. I'm sorry, she whispered, and she poured half a bottle of whiskey he kept on the rail over the wound. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, his entire body going rigid, but he didn't cry out. Her hands, which had trembled holding a gun, were now rock steady. She grabbed a clean bar towel, packing it against the wound, applying pressure. She worked in the dim light, her face a mask of concentration. Her terror channeled into fierce, protective action. He watched her, his vision graying at the edges. He saw the strength in her, the steadiness. He leaned his head back against the post, the fight over, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a cold, deep rage. This was his fault. He had let this come to his home. He had let it touch her. He looked at her, her face illuminated by the moonlight, blood on her hands, his blood. This ends tonight, Alessandro whispered, his voice a low, gravelly promise. Alessandro left the 6 men zip-tied and groaning on the porch, their weapons in a pile. He did not call the police. These were not men who respected the law. They were men who respected only fear and leverage. He waited until dawn, his shoulder stitched and tightly bandaged, the whiskey he had used for antiseptic burning in his stomach. He took the keys to the attacker's van. Eva stood on the porch, her face pale, holding a shotgun. She was not the same woman he had found in the cellar. This woman's hands were steady. Stay inside. Lock the doors. Use the radio if anything moves, he commanded. Where are you going? To end this, he said. He drove the van into the small, dusty town. He parked it directly in front of the sheriff's office, blocking the single police cruiser. He walked inside without knocking. Sheriff Brody was a large man, soft in the middle, with a face that was perpetually sweating. He was eating a jelly donut, and he looked up, annoyed, his mustache dusted in sugar. Can I help? Alessandro dropped a set of car keys on the desk, the ones from the van. Your men are outside. They are untidy. I suggest you have them cleaned up before they attract flies. Brody's eyes widened. He half rose from his chair. What in the hell are you talking about? 6 of them, Alessandro said, his voice quiet, conversational. He walked to the window, looking at the sleepy main street. They were very unprofessional. They left a mess. I had to clean it up. I don't like cleaning up other people's messes. Brody was sputtering, his hand inching toward his service weapon. I wouldn't, Alessandro advised, not even looking back. You and I, we have history. Sheriff, or rather, my family does. Brody froze. Alessandro turned slowly, his dark eyes flat and dead. I remember a story my father used to tell about a shipment that went missing in this county. Oh, must be 15 years ago. A very expensive, very illegal shipment. It was unfortunate. But then, a few months later, a young, ambitious deputy suddenly had enough money to buy his boss's silence and run for sheriff. Funny how that works. The blood drained from Brody's face. He was no longer sweating, he was leaking. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do, Alessandro said, stepping closer to the desk. You've been taking Tyler Grant's money. You've been feeding him information. You told him about the ghost at my property. You were going to look the other way when he came to collect what he thought was his. He's a dangerous man, Brody whispered. He is a child playing with toys, Alessandro corrected, his voice a low growl. I am a man who buries children like him. So you are going to tell me everything. You're going to tell me what he paid you for. What is his plan? Brody broke. He was a small-town bully, and a real predator was in the room. He talked, the words tumbling out. Tyler wasn't just sending men, he was coming. He was angry. He was humiliated that his men had failed. He was bringing a full crew, not to scare her, but to take her. When? Alessandro demanded. 2 days, Brody stammered, wiping his face with a trembling hand. He's coming in 2 days. He's going to burn your place to the ground, with you in it. He said he was going to take her back and teach her a lesson for running. Alessandro stared at the man, his disgust a palpable thing. He picked up the keys. You will not call him. You will not warn him. You will, in fact, take a 2-day vacation. You will go fishing. You will be nowhere near a phone. If you are, I will not call my lawyers. I will call my cousin, and they will find that old shipping manifest. Understood? Brody nodded, his eyes wide with terror. Alessandro walked out. He left the van. He had his own truck hidden 2 streets over. When he returned to the vineyard, the sun was high. He found Eva in the kitchen, not hiding, but cleaning the shotgun. The sight of her, so focused, so fierce, sent a crack through the cold armor he was wearing. He told her. He gave her the facts, clean and sharp. He's coming in 2 days with a full crew. He expected tears. He expected panic. He saw her knuckles turn white on the wood of the gun. She was terrified, a fine tremble starting in her hands, but her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a cornered animal. I'm not running, Al, she said, her voice low. I know. He walked to her, took the gun from her hands and set it on the table. He took her trembling hands in his. I know. So we prepare. The terror did not leave, but it changed. It was no longer a paralyzing fog. It was a whetstone sharpening her focus. She refused to hide in the bunker. She would use it, she said, but she would not be a prisoner in it. For the next 48 hours, they worked. They were not a man and a woman in love. They were 2 soldiers fortifying a position. She was no longer a ghost. She was the lady of the vineyard, and she was defending her territory. She walked every path, Alessandro right beside her. Here, she'd say, pointing to a narrow cut-through. If they come from this way, they're bottlenecked. It's a straight shot from the porch. She helped him rig alarms, not high-tech, but effective. Tripwires tied to stacks of empty cans in the dense, overgrown sections of the vineyard. She helped him clear escape routes, a path from the cellar that led to the woods, a loose board in the barn. She memorized the camera angles, becoming his eye in the sky. She was terrified, but the action was an antidote. She was taking her fear and turning it into a weapon. The night before, the work was done. The sun set, painting the sky in colors that were too beautiful for the dread that was descending. The vineyard was quiet, too quiet. Alessandro found her on the porch, watching the darkness. He had been cleaning his weapons, his shoulder aching, his mind a cold, calculating machine, but seeing her there, so small and so strong, the machine faltered. He sat beside her, not on the other chair, but on the steps, close enough that their shoulders brushed, the silence stretched, filled only with the sound of crickets. "I used to be cold," he said, his voice rough, surprising them both. "This life, the one I left, it requires it. You close things off. You build walls. You don't feel... It's safer that way." She turned, her eyes luminous in the dusk. "I came here to be alone," he continued, staring out at the vines. "I came here to be quiet, to let the cold finally take over. I thought that was my penance, to just be nothing." He turned to her, and his eyes were raw with an emotion he had never allowed himself. "And then I found you, this broken, terrified, fierce thing, what? And you make me want, Ava," he choked on the word. "You make me want a life I never thought I deserved. You make me want to build things, not break them. You make me want sunrises, and wine, and this." He touched her hand. "You make me want," he whispered, "and I am terrified. Not of him, not of tomorrow. I'm terrified that I've found this, only to lose you." She didn't speak. She just uncurled her fingers and laced them with his. She brought his hand, the one he had used to kill and to build, to her lips and kissed the rough knuckles. "You won't lose me," she whispered. "I'm not running." He pulled her to him, and the kiss was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of desperation, of fear, of two souls clinging to each other in a storm. That night, they didn't sleep in their separate rooms. He led her to his bed, and they spent one last passionate night together. It was not the frantic, hungry coupling of before. It was bittersweet. It was a goodbye, just in case. It was slow, reverent. Every touch was a prayer. His hands moved over her as if memorizing the feel of her skin, the curve of her hip, the line of her jaw. Her lips were soft, her kisses a silent promise. They moved together with an emotional intensity that was almost painful, a silent vow wrapped in skin and breath. They were two people on the edge of an abyss, holding each other, creating a perfect, sacred moment of life before the battle. Afterward, they lay tangled, her head on his chest. He held her as if he could physically keep the world from touching her, and in the darkness, they finally slept. The morning was cold. The vineyard was unnaturally quiet. A thick mist clung to the ground, muffling all sound. It was a ghost's morning. He dressed in the dark, black jeans, black shirt, combat boots. He was no longer a winemaker. He was who he had been born to be. He took her to the cellar, to the bunker. The blue light of the monitors cast her face in a ghostly glow. "You promise me," he said, gripping her arms. "You do not leave. You are my eyes. You keep me alive from here." "I promise," she whispered, her voice tight with a fear she was trying to swallow. He kissed her. One last, hard kiss. "I love you," he growled. "I love you," she cried. As he sealed the heavy door, Alessandro positioned himself in the shadow of the main winery, a rifle resting on an old barrel. He watched the main road, and he waited. Ava watched the monitors, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. She had the walkie-talkie. She had her gun. At 9:04, the mist began to burn off. At 9:07, they arrived. Not one truck, but 3. They parked at the gate, blocking any escape. 10 men, armed. They fanned out, and then a 4th vehicle, a black SUV, pulled up. Tyler Grant stepped out. He was not a monster. He was worse. He was handsome, with a cheap, charismatic smile, a movie star's arrogance. He wore a leather jacket and sunglasses. "Tyler," Ava whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Alessandro stepped from the shadows. He stood alone, in the middle of the gravel path, a single man against an army. Tyler's smile widened. He clapped, a slow, mocking sound. Well, well, the old man himself. I heard you'd bought a farm. How quaint." "Leave," Alessandro said, his voice carrying on the cold morning air, amplified by the silence. "This is your only warning." Tyler laughed. His men laughed. "You hear that? He's warning us. Tell me, old man, where is she? Where is my property? You can't hide her." "Eva!" he yelled, his voice turning ugly. "I'm here, baby. Come on out and take your medicine." "She is not your property," Alessandro said, his voice flat. "She is whatever I say she is," Tyler screamed, his face twisting. "And you're just the last piece of trash I have to take out. Kill him." The man next to Tyler raised his weapon, but Alessandro was already moving. His rifle cracked once, and the man fell. A brutal fight erupted. "Two on your right, the vines!" Eva screamed into the radio. Gunshots echoed through the valley, a terrible sound that sent birds screaming into the sky. Alessandro was not fighting a war. He was a surgeon. He moved from cover to cover, his movements economical, lethal. He was one man, but he knew the terrain. He had his eyes in the sky. "He's behind the tractor." She guided, a shot, a man down. The fight moved closer to the house. One of Tyler's men, trying to get a better angle, knocked over an old lantern on the dry porch. It shattered, and the kerosene-soaked wood ignited. Fire began to lick up the side of the house. "The porch is on fire!" Eva screamed. Alessandro was pinned. Two men were coming at him from different sides. He was trapped. He took out the first, but the second was on him, a large, brutal man. They crashed through the trellis, wrestling on the ground. Alessandro's rifle was gone. The man was fumbling, pulling a long knife from his boot. Alessandro was on his back, his wounded shoulder screaming, trying to keep the man at bay. He saw the flash of the blade. He roared, a sound of pure, animalistic rage. Eva heard it, not over the radio. She heard it through the stone of the cellar. It was a sound that broke her promise. She looked at the monitor. She saw the knife. She saw Alessandro, his face strained, about to lose. She was out of the door before she even made the decision. She ran, her own gun in her hand, her bare feet flying over the cold ground. She burst into the sunlight, her eyes wild. The man had the knife raised, ready to plunge it into Alessandro's chest. "Hey!" she screamed. The man's head snapped up, surprise on his ugly face. He saw her, a small, furious woman in a t-shirt. He sneered, turning his attention from Alessandro for just one fatal second. Eva didn't tremble. She didn't think. She raised the handgun, just as Alessandro had taught her. She breathed out. She squeezed. Twice. The shots were clean. The man's eyes went wide. He looked down at the two dark holes in his chest. He collapsed, falling sideways off of Alessandro. Alessandro stared, panting, at the woman who had just saved his life. Her arm was still outstretched, the gun smoking. "The porch," she whispered, her voice shaking. The moment was shattered by another shot, the last of Tyler's crew. Alessandro was on his feet, pulling Eva behind him, and they were back to back. He had his handgun now. Together, they finished the last man. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The vineyard was a war zone. Bodies lay scattered among the vines. The house was burning. And in the chaos, Tyler Grant, who had watched his entire crew be decimated, who had seen the woman he called property kill one of his best men, finally understood. He was outmatched. He turned and fled. Not to his car. He ran, scrambling into the thick woods, into the smoke, a coward disappearing into the wild. Alessandro did not feel the pain in his shoulder. He did not feel the heat of the fire now consuming the porch. He watched the man, the coward, the source of her terror, scramble into the woods. He saw only red. He did not grab a gun. This was not for distance. This was not an execution. This was a removal. He ran, ignoring Eva's cry. He plunged into the smoke, his boots crashing over the dry underbrush. The vineyard, their sanctuary, was a hellscape of burning vines and acrid air. He was faster than Tyler, stronger, and he was fueled by a rage so pure and cold it was almost clarifying. He tackled him 50 yards into the woods, a brutal, flying tackle that sent them both crashing into a shallow ditch, rolling through dry leaves and smoldering embers. Tyler was younger, wiry and fought like a cornered rat. He kicked, his boot connecting with Alessandro's wounded shoulder. Pain, white-hot and blinding, flared, but Alessandro's grip only tightened. He slammed a fist into Tyler's gut, and the man's breath left him in a whoosh. They scrambled to their feet, two dark shapes in the swirling smoke. "You're crazy," Tyler choked, wiping blood and dirt from his mouth. "You're dead. You're both dead. You will never—" Alessandro growled, advancing. "Touch her again." He lunged, but Tyler was slippery. He grabbed a thick, broken branch and swung it, connecting with Alessandro's ribs. Alessandro grunted but did not stop. He seized the branch, yanking Tyler forward, and drove his head into the man's face. The sound of breaking cartilage was a sharp, wet crack in the burning air. Tyler shrieked, falling back, clutching his nose. He was a bully, all arrogance and no substance. Pinned. Desperate. He spat a mouthful of blood. You think you saved her?" He laughed, a gurgling, painful sound. "You think she's special? She's just another broken toy. Old man. That's all she is. I break them. You try to fix them. But they're always broken. She was nothing before me, and she's nothing now. She'll never be clean." Alessandro stopped. The fire in his chest, the white-hot rage, vanished. It was replaced by an absolute, freezing calm. He had seen this before. The desperate, pathetic lashing out of a weak man trying to claim power he had never earned. He looked at the creature in front of him, the man who had beaten her, who had terrorized her, who had tried to reduce her to a thing, the man who had just called her a toy. "She is not broken, Yinchi," Alessandro said, his voice quiet. He drew back his right fist. It was not a swing of wild rage. It was a single, weighted, definitive blow. It was the full force of his regret, his past and his purpose. It was the sound of judgment. His fist connected with Tyler's jaw, and the man's head snapped back. He did not make a sound. He simply collapsed, his eyes rolling back, and lay still in the dirt, knocked out cold. Alessandro stood over him, breathing heavily. His shoulder throbbed, his ribs ached. He was bloodied, but he was alive, and the monster was still. He heard the sound of sirens in the distance, not the local, wheezing siren of Brody's single cruiser. This was a chorus of them, coming fast. He walked back, emerging from the smoke, a dark figure returning from the inferno. Eva was standing exactly where he had left her, the handgun still gripped in her hands, her face a mask of soot, tears, and utter terror. The house was now fully engulfed in flames, a roaring funeral pyre. "Al!" she screamed when she saw him, running to him. "The police! They're coming! What do we do?" He put his good arm around her, pulling her against his side, away from the burning house. "It's all right," he said. "I called them." She looked at him, confused. "What?" "Not me," he clarified. "A friend, a contact. This is not Brody's department. This is the state." The cruisers, 3 of them and 2 unmarked sedans, pulled up the long gravel driveway, their lights washing the scene in strobes of red and blue. They did not move with the casual slowness of small-town cops. They were professionals. They exited their vehicles, weapons drawn, taking in the scene. They saw the bodies, the military-grade weapons scattered on the ground, the burning building, and the 2 survivors. 1 man, bloody and bruised, and 1 woman, shaking but alive, holding a gun, a man in a suit, clearly in charge, stepped forward. His eyes scanned the yard, ticking off the dead men. He recognized the weapons. "Alessandro Morone?" he asked, his voice all business. Alessandro nodded. "We received an anonymous tip about a multi-vehicle disturbance and automatic weapons fire," the agent said, his eyes hard. "Looks like we missed the party." He walked over to one of Tyler's men. "We've been after Grant's crew for 6 months. They were suspected in 3 drug-related homicides and human trafficking." He looked at Alessandro, then at Eva. "It seems," he said, choosing his words carefully, "that you 2 had a problem, and it's now resolved. We'll need a statement, but given the evidence, the dead men, and the weapons they brought, this looks like a textbook case of self-defense." He gestured to the woods. "There is 1 more, unconscious. In the ditch, Alessandro said. The agent nodded, signaling two of his men. We'll take it from here. Mr. Marone, we'll secure the scene. I suggest you get her looked at. We'll be in touch. There was no mention of Sheriff Brody. There was no suspicion. Sal, his old contact, had done his job. The evidence was clear. A rival criminal organization had attacked and lost. The law had no interest in complicating the narrative. As the agents fanned out, their voices muffled and professional, the sirens were finally silenced. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of the officers, the tension, the adrenaline, the sheer animal terror that had held Eva upright for 48 hours. The thing that had made her a warrior snapped. Her knees buckled. The gun, her last defense, clattered to the gravel. Forgotten. She didn't just cry. She collapsed. It was a sound he had never heard. A deep, tearing, heartbreaking wail that came from the very bottom of her soul. It was the sound of a year of fear, of pain, of running, finally violently, leaving her body. Alessandro rushed to her, his own pain non-existent in the face of hers. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, ignoring the agents, ignoring the world. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest, tucking her head under his chin. She wept. She wept for the woman she had been, for the life she had lost, for the man she had killed. He just held her. He rocked her gently on the gravel drive, his hand stroking her soot-covered hair. He kissed her temple, his own eyes burning from the smoke, or perhaps from something else. "It's over," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Eva, it's really over. I have you. You're safe." The house was ash. The guest cottage, spared by the wind, became their home. The first few weeks were a haze of statements, insurance adjusters, and the deafening silence of a life after the war. The vineyard was scorched, a black, scarred landscape, but the roots were deep. They did not leave. They did not run. They rebuilt. It was not fast. It was not easy. He had money, but she had a vision. They did not rebuild the house as it was. They cleared the wreckage, but they left the stone foundation in the cellar, the place of her terror and her salvation. The first people they hired were not a construction crew. They were women. Eva drove to a shelter in the next county, a place she had almost gone to herself. She offered them a job, not a handout, a job. Marone Vines was born from the ashes. They rebuilt the main house, but it was no longer a fortress. It was a sanctuary. The winery was the first building they finished. It was open, filled with light. It became a place for women who had fled abuse, a place to work, to heal, to learn a trade. Some learned to prune vines, some learned to balance books, some learned to cook for the crews. When the new tasting room was finished, a beautiful, airy space built from reclaimed wood and glass that overlooked the valley, Eva brought the small tin box from the cellar. She placed the old journal in a simple glass display case, right by the new stone fireplace. It was open to the last entry. The ink faded, but the words clear. "I am not his. I am my own." It was a symbol, a promise. Months passed. The seasons turned. The black, charred vines were cut back hard, leaving only stumps. But spring came, and with it, new, vibrant green leaves pushed toward the sun. It was late summer, almost a year later. The air was warm, thick with the scent of jasmine and ripening grapes. The vineyard was alive. The house was no longer quiet. It was filled with the low hum of life. The sound of 3 women laughing in the kitchen, the clink of bottles from the winery. Alessandro and Eva were on the terrace of their new home, lying on a thick blanket, tangled in each other. The stars were a brilliant, diamond-sharp canopy above them. They had worked all day, checking the new irrigation, and they were tired, their muscles aching with good, honest work. He had found peace, not the cold, empty silence he had once craved, but this warm, noisy, complicated peace. He had found it in her. He turned his head, looking at her profile in the starlight. She was watching the sky, a small, content smile on her lips. Her scars had faded, but they were part of her. He traced the one on her jaw, a faint white line. He felt a swell of love so profound it was almost painful. He had no ring. He had no grand promises left, only the truth of their life. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice rough. "With me, forever." She turned her head. Her eyes were soft, luminous, free of every ghost. She had known this moment was coming. She had been living this moment for months. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. She leaned in, her lips brushing his. She kissed him. A slow, deep kiss that tasted of wine and comfort and home. It was a kiss of utter certainty. She pulled back, just enough to speak, her breath warm on his skin. "I already did." The sky to the east was just beginning to turn from black to a deep, bruised purple. They did not go inside. They lay wrapped in each other, their hearts healed, their bodies safe. They watched the sun rise over the vines, a spectacular, brilliant blaze of orange and pink. It was a new day, a day of peace, which they had fought for, a day of passion, which had healed them, and a day of purpose, which they had found together in the ashes. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We are so grateful to have you here with us. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and say hello. For more stories like this, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories. And finally, we want to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite part of this story? Let us know in the comments. We look forward to seeing you in the next one.